When most of us trace our family history, we're looking for that one single starting point, right? That one ancestor who first came to America. But what if a family had two? Today, we're diving into the incredible story of the Bryant family, a family with a dual origin story that starts on two different ships, in two different colonies, decades apart. So that's the big mystery we're tackling. How is that even possible? How can one single family line have two completely separate beginnings in colonial America? Well, we're going to follow the paper trail and piece this amazing puzzle together. All right, every good detective story has to start somewhere. For us, it begins in Gaston County, North Carolina, in the early 1900s. The man we're looking at is John Wesley Bryant. He's our anchor, the most recent piece of the puzzle that we're going to have to work backward from. So, to solve this, we've got to trace the family's journey in reverse. As you can see, the trail takes us from North Carolina back to Alabama in the 1850s, and then even further back to the family's home base in the 19th century, Spartanburg, South Carolina. And it's in Spartanburg where things start to get really interesting. Okay, so our investigation has led us to Spartanburg, South Carolina. Back in the early 1800s, this area was basically Bryant Central. This is where we start to meet the key figures, the patriarchs, who are going to lead us even further back in time. The first person we need to talk about is a guy named Coleman Bryant. He's the second great-grandfather in this line, and he's super important because he's the one who decided to pack up the family and move west, kicking off the journey that eventually landed them in North Carolina. The 1850 census is just perfect. It gives us this little snapshot of Coleman's life right before that big move. We see him listed as a farmer living in Spartanburg with his wife and kids. It's a moment frozen in time, just before they headed off to Alabama. Now, if we trace the line back from Coleman, we get to the absolute central figure of the Spartanburg clan, his great-grandfather, William Bryant Sr. And get this, his story drops us right into the middle of American history. He was a veteran of the Revolutionary War. William's military records are an absolute goldmine. They show he was actually born in Virginia, not South Carolina. He fought at the legendary Battle of Cowpens during the Revolution and only moved to Spartanburg after the war was over. This is a huge discovery. It's our first solid link connecting the Carolina Bryants all the way back to Virginia. And how do we know this connection is rock solid? Well, you've got to love old land deeds. We found documents from the 1820s where William Sr. is giving property to his sons. And the language used, "for the love and natural affection I bear for my son," that was as good as a birth certificate back then. It's the proof. So, case closed, right? The family came from Virginia. Easy. But hold on. Just when you think you've got it all figured out, family lore and a whole different set of records point to a completely different, even earlier origin story, one that starts on the tropical island of Barbados. Yeah, this second trail takes us way, way back to the 17th century, to a man named Thomas Bryant. And he wasn't a farmer in the American South. He was an English planter living and working in the booming sugar trade of Barbados. The records are pretty clear. This Thomas came over from England to Barbados way back in 1634. He became what was known as a planter of Barbados, a landowner deep in the island's sugar economy. And he lived his whole life there, passing away in 1661. So you're probably asking, how did his family get to Spartanburg? Well, it was a multi-generational journey. After Thomas died, Barbados got super crowded. So between 1670 and 1700, many of the planters' sons, these so-called Barbadian adventurers, moved to the brand new colony of Carolina, setting up shop near Charleston. And over the next century, their descendants just kept pushing inland, eventually ending up in, you guessed it, the Spartanburg area. So there you have it, another clear path from Barbados to Spartanburg. That must be the real story, right? Well, not quite. Just as we think we've finally found the definitive origin, the records show us that this is only half the picture. There's another, totally separate and even earlier beginning for a Bryant family in America. Okay, so let's jump to that second parallel story. This one doesn't start in the Caribbean. It starts on a ship, the Bona Nova, sailing directly from England to the shores of Virginia, long before those Barbadian planters ever thought about leaving the island. This is what's so wild. Just look at this. You have the South Carolina line arriving from Barbados around 1670, and then you have the Virginia line arriving directly from England a full 50 years earlier in 1620. These are two completely separate immigration events for the same family name. The patriarch of this Virginia story is a man named Edward Bryant, and he was among the earliest wave of English settlers to arrive in the Virginia colony, setting foot there when it was still a tiny, struggling outpost. And we know he was there because his arrival is documented in the 1624 Virginia muster. Think of it as one of the colony's first ever census reports. It lists him arriving on the ship Bonanova in 1620 and living in Elizabeth City as a servant to a Captain Edward Waters. Now, to understand why Edward's arrival was such a big deal, you have to understand the engine of colonial expansion back then, the headright system. It was a pretty simple deal. If you were a wealthy person and you paid for someone's voyage to Virginia, the colony gave you 50 acres of land. And this shows exactly how that worked. Edward Bryant's trip was paid for by Captain Waters, so in return, Waters claimed 50 acres of Virginia land. It was literally an economic transaction that built the colony, one person and one 50-acre plot at a time. So now we have two completely separate Bryant family streams flowing into America, one from Barbados into Charleston, the other from England into Virginia. The final million-dollar question is, how did these two streams eventually merge into a single river? Well, over the next 150 years, both branches of the family started migrating, completely independently of one another. The Virginia Bryants pushed south, looking for new land. At the same time, the Barbados Bryants pushed northwest from the coast, looking for the same thing. And almost unbelievably, both of their paths led them to the exact same place, Spartanburg, South Carolina. And here is where it all comes together. This family has this incredibly rare dual colonial legacy. You have the Virginia line, starting with Edward in 1620. You have the South Carolina line, starting with Thomas's descendants around 1670. And the convergence point is William Bryant Sr., a Revolutionary War soldier. Born into the Virginia line, he moves after the war and settles in Spartanburg, the very same region where the descendants of the Barbados line had already put down roots. Two streams finally becoming one river.
In the end, the story of the Bryants is just a powerful reminder that our own histories are often way more complex and way more interconnected than we ever imagined. It really leaves you wondering, doesn't it? How many hidden stories of convergence just like this are waiting to be found in your own family tree?